breaking over the hills. So
Or both at the same time, yeah.
yeah, exactly. Right on.
All right, guys, on Zoom, we're about to go live. So whatever you say is going to be broadcasted through the speakers here. So here we go. Three, two, one.
Uh, no more naughty words.
Welcome to the February 10th general meeting of the Los Angeles Astronomical Society. President Keith Armstrong.
I can't hear.
There we go. That's better. All right, I'm gonna try this one more time. Welcome to the February 10th general meeting of the Los Angeles Astronomical Society. I'm President Keith Armstrong, doing my first meeting. A little nervous. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's great to see a lot of familiar faces out there. I see you, Ted. How you doing? There he is. Excellent. We have a great speaker with Dr. Wasserman tonight. I'm really looking forward to learning a little history of our beloved astronomical pursuit. We'll get to that as soon as possible. Are there any new members out in Zoom land? Do I see anybody that's new?
Yes, I'm a new member.
All right, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, so my name's Stephanie Rodriguez. I just recently decided that I want to kind of pursue this as my future since I'm currently in high school. So I thought, what better way than to join a club or society?
That's excellent. Excellent. Congratulations for making a wonderful choice. If you have any questions, you have no shortage of experts and pretend experts here.
Thank you.
What about here in the audience? Do we have any new members? Oh, we do. Okay. Here, I'm gonna walk over so you can introduce thyselves.
Hi everyone, my name is Oksana. Okay, hi everyone. Hi everyone, my name is Oksana. I'm Ukrainian, but I also love stars. So I decided to join LAAS community. I've been to Chile, and that's where my love for stars actually happened. And I'm very excited to be here.
We got one or two more. Hold on.
Hi, I'm Houston. I just joined and just wanted to get in touch with more people who are interested in this as I am. It's been a passion of mine since I was a kid. So, yeah.
Who's next? Oh, I know who. She's actually smarter than all of us here. So here we go.
Not at all, not at all. My name's Alisar. I'm a museum guide here, like Evan, and I'm currently applying for master's programs in astrophysics, so we'll see how that goes. Nice to meet you all.
All right. Nobody else? Yeah, they got me running around. I'm coming, Keith. Hold on. Yeah. What did you do?
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to introduce Spencer Sue, who will then introduce our speaker. We got red tape here too.
Oh, wait. What about club business?
We're going to get to that afterwards. We just want to make sure that Dr. Wasserman has all the time that he needs. There's going to be plenty of club business. I got a whole thing of it here. We're just going to get to the speaker sooner than later.
Thank you, Keith. So I think a lot of you have had the same experience I've had when you've been out with your telescope. Somebody comes up and says, "So, are you an astrologer? Or how long have you been studying astrology?" You sort of cringe internally, and then you say politely, "Well, you mean astronomy, right?" So, like most of you, I've got a day job, and astronomy is my passion, my hobby. And my day job is a research scientist in a medical center. So in my mind, I normally don't associate medicine with astronomy, much less astrology. Oh, sorry. Okay. So anyways, a few months ago, I met Dr. Wasser when I was attending the opening of an art installation that was part of a program at Caltech featuring the history of astronomy. I was just fascinated by his description of how astronomy, astrology, and medicine developed or overlapped in the Middle Ages. So Dr. Wasser is an associate professor of physiology emeritus at Texas A&M University. As a comparative physiologist, he studied metabolic, respiratory, and cardiovascular physiology across diverse species, including reptiles, birds, and mammals. Since 2004, he's been leading a study abroad group program in Germany, focusing on the history of medicine. And the goal there is to provide future doctors with a broad foundation in both medicine and the humanities.
So it actually
He's
looks
written
good.
and
And
lectured
then
widely on a
I'm
range
gonna
of
move my camera out of the way.
medical history topics, including military medicine, public health in ancient Rome, the role of women healers in the Middle East or the Middle Ages, alchemy, and Leonardo da Vinci as a cardiovascular physiologist and the first bioengineer. So please welcome Dr. Jeremy Wasser, who will speak to us about the intersection of astronomy, astrology, and medicine.
Thank you. Okay. You should be able to hear me through the lavalier, I believe. Is that pretty good? Bring it up higher. Okay, and how about now? A little more? Sure, a little more. There, how's that? And good for the people on Zoom, I hope, as well. Thank you, Spencer, for the introduction. And thank you also all for inviting me here. I'm delighted to be here to talk to you at this meeting. And I have to say that I'm particularly excited to be in the Leonard Nimoy Event Horizon Theater. I've been a Trekkie since the 1960s, original series. And I've felt for a long, long time that Nimoy's Mr. Spock was sort of my archetype as a scientist. And since I wasn't able to join Starfleet, I got a PhD in physiology instead. But anyway, it's a real thrill to be here. But now let's boldly go to the start of my presentation. The Zodiacal Man, Astronomy, Astrology, and Medicine in the Middle Ages. And I will start, excuse me a second, my notes are wandering off the folder, with this. When the moon is in the 7th house and Jupiter aligns with Mars, then peace will guide the planets and love will steer the stars. This is the beginning lyrics of the song The Age of Aquarius, which was written, the lyrics and music by Aredo Regni and McDermott for the 1967 Broadway musical Hair, and then made famous 2 years later, more famous, when the musical group The Fifth Dimension recorded it. And it's not strictly speaking my topic tonight. I will talk a lot about astrology, but in the context of astrological medicine. But I did want to make a point about this song. This is sort of the reverse of our usual underlying concept of astrology, which is that the stars and the planets direct our actions and influence our lives. And in this song, it's the reverse. Earthly practices, love, peace, direct the movements of the celestial bodies, albeit only after experiencing a favorable position of the moon and a good planetary alignment. In general, we modern folk, and I'm sort of presuming most of the members of this audience who are astronomers and astronomer aficionados, we don't believe in that. We believe in astronomy, not astrology, as Spencer was alluding to. And we don't ascribe to planetary and stellar positions a direct role in our lives. In the European Middle Ages, however, that was not the case. There was a universal belief in the power of the planets and stars to affect and influence earthly and personal events, and that influence extended to the questions of health and medicine. So to understand this concept, though, and to understand this relationship in the Middle Ages between astronomy, astrology, and medicine, we have to start not in the Middle Ages themselves. We have to go back further than that. We have to go back to ancient Babylon. And what you're looking at now is an astromedical tablet. It's from ancient Babylon, somewhere between the 4th and the 400 and 100 before the Common Era. It's about 20.5 centimeters wide, and it's written in cuneiform on both sides. It's in the British Museum. It is BM 56605. And it was the ancient Babylonians to the best of our knowledge, who were the first to sort of structure the stars and the constellations into 12 divisions, the 12 zodiacal divisions that happened sort of in the late Babylonian astral science around the 5th century before the Common Era. They were also the first to connect what was happening in the sky with these constellations to the human body. They mapped the zodiac onto the human body, dividing the human body into 12 regions. Each one had a sign that ruled over it. And this is the document that talks about that. The other side of this document contains prognostic and diagnostic omens, because in ancient Babylon and the ancient world in general, but certainly in ancient Babylonia, medicine and magic, science and sorcery, there was not the modern distinction that we have today, and medicine was a theological activity. It was handled by priests as well as sort of priest physicians, and divination, the looking at omens, both the omens of the internal innards of animals, for example, but also what was going on in the heavens, was an integral part of how doctors in ancient Babylon diagnosed and then also generated therapies and also generated prognoses that helped them figure out, they felt, what was going to happen to that particular patient. And I have a quote for you from this tablet, translated, not by me, translated by about cuneiform scholars, and it reads as follows: "If the great star, Aquarius, touches the patient and his pelvis, upper thigh hurts, on the right side, you shall place cypress wood in a bag made of cat skin on his neck. You shall anoint him with oil, and he will get well again." Well, it might depend a little bit on what you put in that bag of cat skin. There are, of course, herbal medicines known in the ancient world that were actually effective, that contained active ingredients, substances, chemical substances that worked. Not sure about this one, but you have to also have the proper zodiacal alignment for it to work, according to these ancient Babylonian physicians. This concept of mapping zodiacal signs onto the human body is called melothesia, and this is the Greek for it. It is a Greek concept, but dating back to the ancient Babylonians. And again, it means mapping the zodiacal signs or the planets onto specific regions of the human body and ascribing to them effects on health, on disease, and also indicating what kind of cures could be attempted. This is the etymology of that word, of melothesia, melos, limb, and thesis, position. And if we look at another example of this, this time from the Greek world. This is a papyrus describing what is referred to as planetary melothesia. This is the mapping of the planets, the 7 known planets at that time, onto the human body rather than the signs of the zodiac. This is from around the 2nd century of the Common Era, and in this papyrus, the text refers to this concept of melothesia. In medical astrology, prognoses and illnesses were based on the phases of the heavenly bodies connected with the affected parts. Drugs, for example, were also administered according to or on the basis of where the stars and planets were. So they would have said on the basis of cosmic sympathies, on the basis of cosmic sympathies, that there was a relationship between what was going on in the universe and what was going on inside the human body. This concept can be broadly described as being the macrocosm in the microcosm, the macrocosm being the universe, the microcosm being the human body. This particular papyrus, as I said, is a planetary melothesia. It relates the planets to specific regions. And interestingly, in it, there is also a description of the concept of epicycles, which we'll talk a little bit more about in just a moment. This was something that was developed in the Hellenistic period by people such as Hipparchus, who is one of the astronomers, as you all know, I'm sure, on your astronomical monument out there in front of the observatory. I wanted to mention that. And then Claudius Ptolemy, who I'll talk about in a little bit more detail, also worked on this and sort of improved on them to explain planetary motions in his geocentric model. A bit more about this concept of the macrocosm in the microcosm. It was a general concept in the Middle Ages and a very important one. It was not restricted to either astronomy, astrology, or medicine. And this is an example from a very, very famous personage from the 12th century. This was the Benedictine nun, visionary, composer of music, builder of convents and monasteries, and also physician, healer, Hildegard von Bingen. Bingen is a small town on the Rhine, was a Roman town. Hildegard lived in the 12th century, and Bingen is located between Koblenz and Mainz on the River Rhine, not too far from where I live when I live in Germany, which I do for about half of the year. And Hildegard, as I said, along with being a healer, was a visionary. She had visions which she interpreted to be coming to her directly from the Almighty, and she wrote a couple of books about them, and this is one known as the Liber Divinorum Operum, and this is a manuscript copy from around 1230 to 1240, so after she died, but not too long after she died, and it shows an image which scholars refer to as the Trinity and macrocosm in relation to man. And I also wanted to show you that in many of these illustrations from these 13th century manuscripts of Hildegard's work, there'll be a little inset image of her receiving the vision, and I blew it up for you so you could see it, I hope. There on the left, you can see Hildegard sitting there receiving the vision from God and taking notes on a wax tablet. She would then give these to her secretary, her amanuensis, a monk named Volmar, and he would then write them up in better Latin and in a better handwriting, and then illustrators and gilders would take over and create these manuscripts. Now, we're going to be talking quite a bit today about humoral medicine, because in the ancient world, from the Greeks forward, and in the European Middle Ages, and actually to relatively modern times, medicine was humoral medicine from Hippocrates. And what Hippocrates, the Greek founder of Western medicine, believed was that there were in the human body, and in the bodies of other animals as well, 4 humors or juices. In German, they're actually called juices, Säfte. And these were blood, phlegm, and phlegm was any fluid that was clear. So mucus, lymph, also pus. So for example, a suppurating wound, an infected wound, would be leaking pus, and this was thought to be one of these humors. Yellow bile, which is the actual bile made by your liver, stored in your gallbladder, and then a 4th humor, which they called black bile, and one of the problems with that humor is it doesn't exist, but it was thought to be at all. It was thought to be a liquid, a humor in the body that caused the other liquids to be dark. So if one's blood was dark, it was an excess of black bile. If one had a dark colored mucus, it was an excess of black bile, and so on. And this is a representation of that, an alchemical one, from a 16th century manuscript by Leonhard Tyrnisse, and it shows a hermaphroditic figure, and there's some zodiacal signs and alchemical signs, and then in each of the 4 blocks, you have the 4 temperaments, because it was also believed in the Middle Ages that the balance of these humors affected not just health, which was the Hippocratic tradition. Health meant your humors were in balance, disease and ill health meant that your humors were somehow out of balance, but it also affected your temperament. So there's the phlegmatic temperament, sanguinic, melancholic, and choleric, and I'll talk a bit more about them as well. And these were also influenced by the amount of these different humors that an individual person might have. Humoral medicine was medicine, was the principal thinking and underlying philosophy of medicine really until germ theory. And germ theory is a product of the middle 19th century. So we're not talking only about ancient or medieval history here. We're talking about something that's actually quite modern until really relatively modern times. The humors also in the Hippocratic tradition corresponded to the 4 primary qualities, so hot, dry, cold, and wet, to the 4 seasons, the 4 ages of man, the 4 elements, earth, air, wind, and fire, and the 4 temperaments. So it was an entire philosophic concept molded into this medical one. I now want to turn to another ancient astronomer, one who actually isn't represented in your monument, but an important one, and one who, again, I think all or most of you are familiar with, and that's Claudius Ptolemy. Claudius Ptolemy lived somewhere between about 100 to 170 of the Common Era. He was a Greek, but he lived in Egypt. He lived in Alexandria, that we believe, the city of Alexandria, which was a city founded in Egypt, conquered and founded in Egypt by Alexander the Great in the 4th century before the Common Era. And it was a center of learning in the ancient world. There was a famous library there, ultimately destroyed like all of the famous ancient libraries. But Ptolemy was quite a guy. He was a mathematician, he was an astronomer, he was an astrologer. One could be both back then, and there was not a conflict or a problem with that. He wrote about a dozen scientific treatises, which were important in Byzantine science, in European, but also Islamic science later on. And the first of these treatises, one of the two that are most important for our topic today, was his astronomical work. And it's known as the Almagest, and was originally titled, in the translation of the Greek, would have been Mathematical Treatise. And in this work, Ptolemy describes his cosmology, his geocentric cosmology, the concept of cycles and epicycles. He believed the Earth was the center of the universe, that the planets, the moon, and the sun rotated in circular orbits around the Earth. And then he generated a concept, or adapted a concept, of epicycles in order to make some of his observations fit the reality a little bit better. He was, of course, wrong. I know you all know that. But the geocentric model was an important one, and it lasted for something like 1,200 years after Ptolemy, until it was replaced in the 16th and 17th century by the Copernican model and the works of people like Tycho Brahe, Kepler, and Galileo. Another of Ptolemy's books that are very important for tonight's lecture was his book on astrology. He did separate the two. He thought both were real. He also thought both disciplines were prognostic. They were conjectural sciences, he would have called them. They predicted things. And that's true. In astronomy, one calculates and predicts the position of planets, constellations, and other sort of universal activities. And that is also true in astrology. He does discuss the effects of planets on us, Melethesia, in his book on astrology, which is known as the Tetrabiblios, or the Four Books. This work was very influential. And among the people it influenced was a near contemporary of Ptolemy's, a physician this time, a man named Galen of Pergamum. Galen lived in the 2nd century of the Common Era. He was a Hippocratic and a humoralist. He believed in the four humors, and he was an extremely successful Roman physician. So successful that the other theories of medicine kind of died out. The non-humoral theories, and there were some, were conquered, as it were, by Galen and the humoral theory. And Galen was a great anatomist. He did a lot of dissections, but not of human beings. He therefore made some serious mistakes, because the anatomy of non-human animals that are mammals, is similar to human anatomy, but not exactly the same. But Galen was so influential that, you know, when I teach undergraduates history of medicine, I say Galen was the most influential physician of all time, in spite of having been wrong about almost everything. His word was medical dogma for about 1,000 to 1,500 years. But he also accepted the fact that medical astrology, as developed originally by the Egyptians and the Babylonians, was important. And Galen's acceptance of that kind of gave it this imprimatur that it was a real and important thing. And this held for, well, many centuries. Let me show you a page from an Arabic translation of Ptolemy's astronomical work, the Almagest, the Mathematici Syntaxis. This is from the 14th century, late 14th century. It's in the Bodleian Library. And the works of Ptolemy influenced, as I said, the Islamic world, as well as the European Christian Middle Ages. And this is important because one of the things that happened with the collapse of the Western Roman Empire in the late 5th century of the Common Era was many of the ancient works, medical and otherwise, were lost. The Greek originals, or in some cases Latin originals. They were lost to the West, but copies were preserved in the great learning centers of the Middle East, so places like Tehran, Damascus, and so on. And scholars there, Middle Eastern scholars, Persian and Arabic scholars, translated these works into their languages, so Arabic, Farsi, and Syriac. And then in around the 12th century, these works began to percolate back into Europe, into Christian Europe, where they were translated, mostly by monks, back into Greek from the Middle Eastern languages. And it is because of the translations and the care given to these manuscripts by the scholars of the Middle East that we have the works of Galen, the works of Ptolemy, and many others that otherwise would have been lost to the West forever. And I always thought that was really a very sort of cool factoid. So that is why I'm showing you this picture. Ptolemy's planetary models, like those of most of his predecessors, were geocentric, as I said. And they were universally accepted until, again, quite relatively recently, beginning with Copernicus in the 16th century. Let me also share a quote from the Tetrabiblios for you, from Ptolemy's work on astrology. He credits the Egyptians with being really good at this. Of this, the Egyptians seem to have been well aware. Their discoveries of the great faculties of this science have exceeded those of other nations, and they have in all cases combined the medical art with the astronomical prognostication by means of the science called by them medical mathematics, since their astronomy pointed out to them the kind of temperament liable to be acted upon, while their medical skill made them acquainted with everything suitable or unsuitable to each of the effects to be procured. For without astronomical knowledge, medical aid would be most frequently unavailing, since the same identical remedies are not better calculated for all persons whatsoever than they are for all diseases whatsoever. So the purpose or the method of astrological medicine was to determine specific remedies, also diagnoses, but remedies, therapies, and prognoses for specific patients based on their astrological sign and on the astrological signs that were taking place at that moment when the disease initiated, when the disease reached a crisis point. It's quite complicated, and I will share some of that complexity with you as we move forward. This is a page from book 10 of the Tetrabiblios. Now, I did want to show you one picture from Ptolemy's astronomical work showing the epicycles. This is from a 13th century copy, a translation into Latin of the Greek work by Gerard of Cremona, and it shows an orbit, and then it shows an epicycle there as well. And then a couple of really very pretty pictures of this work. This is from a work called Cosmographia by a Portuguese astronomer, Bartolomeu Veio, from 1568. It shows the Earth at the center. It shows the planets, including the sun and the moon, which were planets, in a sense, orbiting around the Earth. And then in the very outermost level there, it has a layer which you can sort of barely see. If you look to the upper right, you can see the word Dei in that red ring, which means God. The text in the outermost layer reads, "The heavenly empire, the dwelling of God and of all of the elect." So that's where the saints go when they die, and that's where those who go to heaven go, and that is where you will find God. And another also colorful image, this from 1661, this is from an astronomical atlas called the Harmonia Macrocosmica by a German cartographer and cosmographer, German-Dutch, named Andreas Solarius, quite a famous work. It was reproduced often. It also shows the Earth in the center. It shows the planets revolving around the Earth. They're actually represented not by those pink circles, but by the little sunbursts in each of them. Interestingly, there's a minor planet named after Solarius. 12618 Solarius is named in his honor. Now, Ptolemy also produced sort of the cliff notes for the Tetrabiblios. The work in the Tetrabiblios and in the Almagest was mathematically complex. And what Ptolemy did was he generated a work, a much shorter work, that we call the handy tablets. And these were popular and very popular into the Middle Ages and into the early modern period, and were used by astrologers and astronomers to do calculations. And this is a picture from a 9th century manuscript of the handy tablets. It's in the Vatican Library, in the Biblioteca Apostolica Vaticana, and it shows the zodiacal constellations and a variety of other images in this very cool picture. So this is what the sort of working astrologer or working astronomer would have handy, well, so to speak, the handy tablets, and would use them. But a physician would also have this and use this as well. So finally, I'll show you a picture of the title of this talk, the Zodiacal Man or Zodiac Man. And this is a representation of melothesia, of stellar melothesia, not planetary. It shows a figure of a man, and to the best of my ability to discover, always a man. I've never found a zodiac woman thus far. And the signs of the zodiac are superimposed on that body, going from the head, which is Aries, down to the feet, which is Pisces. This particular example, and I'll show you several others, because they're just really super cool images, is from, interestingly enough, a Welsh manuscript from the 15th century, written mostly by a scholar named Gutun Owain, who is mostly known as a poet, but also was interested and skilled in astrology and also in the medicine of his time. And it's a colorful one, and that text is in fact in Welsh, which is not one of the languages I can read. but it is important work. And the work is kind of a compendium. There's a calendar in it. There's a treatise on urine, which we'll talk also a bit more about, etc. And there's also this Zodiacal Man. There's an agricultural calendar and so on. Another example, and this was my intro slide as well, a particularly beautiful example of a Zodiacal Man from a book of hours known as Les Traits du Duc de Berry. Now, one of the things that's curious about this image and this work that it's in, it's not an astrological work, it's not an astronomer work, and it's not a medical work. It's a book of hours. And a book of hours is a small, physically small, usually, prayer book that lays out for the user, the owner, when to say certain prayers, and also might contain other interesting information. Information about the calendar, information about when the feast days are. They are generally, as I said, physically small, richly illustrated, and they were very expensive. So they typically were owned by royalty, by other wealthy people, and this one was owned by the Duke of Berry, and is a rather famous one with this extraordinary example of the Zodiacal Man. You're not seeing two different people in that picture. It's the front and back of the Zodiacal Man with the images superimposed, and then surrounding the images in those blue lunettes are the zodiacal symbols again. And it's just really quite extraordinary. The Zodiacal Man and astrology in general was important for the medieval church for determining when the various feast days would be. And there were lots of them, and they varied. They were based on sol lunar calendars rather than strictly solar ones, and they moved around. Easter is not at the same time every year, and this had to be carefully calculated. And these are the kinds of things you would find in these books. I wanted to also share this image. This is somewhat later. This is from 1580, and this is not a manuscript. This is a woodcut from a printed book. Printing press with movable type was invented by Gutenberg in Mainz, Germany, around 1451. And in that first 50 years and beyond, there was a burst of printing, and a lot of these kinds of works would then be printed and widely distributed. This is from an almanac by someone named Petrus Slovatius, and what it shows, along with the usual naked man and the images, it shows that the figure is opened up. There's an incision made down the midline, and this is something we see in a fair number of these Zodiacal Men, almost as if they were being dissected or opened up and prepared for dissection. And there are the zodiacal signs surround this figure, and there are little arrows pointing to the various parts, and I wanted to make one of them easier for you to see. That's the heart there in the center of this Zodiacal Man's chest, and it relates to the zodiacal sign Leo. If we look at a table of what in the Middle Ages they thought the various zodiacal signs, constellations were associated with, we get this. I'm not going to read them all to you, but Aries there was associated with the head, the eyes, the adrenal glands, which are the glands that sit on top of your kidneys and release a variety of important hormones, and also with blood pressure and blood pressure regulation. Gemini, lungs, nerves, arms, head, fingers. Leo, as I said, heart, spine, upper back, and spleen. So there isn't any modern anatomical correlation between these parts, as you can see, but this is what was believed at that time. Scorpio, the reproductive organs, the pelvis, urinary bladder, and the rectum, and then Pisces, the feet, and some of the body fluids, so some of those important humors. Now, when a medieval doctor wanted to adjust somebody's humors, and this was true in the ancient world as well, there was a problem, of course, as I said, with the humor black bile. It doesn't exist, so it can't be manipulated. But one of the ones that could easily be manipulated is blood. And so phlebotomy or bloodletting was a very, very important medical practice in the ancient world, in the Middle Ages, and really up until practically modern times, and even occasionally in modern times, but not in the medieval sense of the word. So this is a detail of a physician letting blood from a patient. It's from a work, a French work known as Le Régime du Corps, the regime of the body, and it's by a physician named Aldobrandino of Siena. This is a 13th century manuscript, and you're looking at what's called an historiated initial. Those are those colorful initials, those colorful first letters, and this is the first letter. It's an N of the word nous, we. And you can see the physician is standing there with the patient's arm. He's using a lancet, so a scalpel, basically. And he's taking blood from what probably the brachial vein, so the vein in your elbow. And below the patient, at the patient's feet, you can see a bowl where the blood would be collected. And phlebotomy was, as I said, very, very important because it's a humor that's easily manipulated. One of the problems, though, is that as a heritage from the ancient world, medieval physicians believed that the human body contained about 24 liters of blood. In reality, we contain about 6 liters of blood. So one could, if you were a medieval physician, to easily take half a liter, which is more or less what you give when you donate a pint or so of blood. But you could also take a liter if you thought that was necessary, or a liter and a half, or maybe even more. And in fact, they knocked patients out. Patients would faint and even occasionally die. And so this was an issue and was, again, like I said, a problem for them. Now, another Zodiac Man, this one is from a work in Middle English from the Physician's Handbook from 1454. And the page is a little bit damaged, but it shows the standard things, naked human figure with the signs of the zodiac superimposed on the body. But I wanted to also show you the so-called phlebotomy man or homo venarium, which we also see in a lot of these works. And this is an example from that same work, the Physician's Handbook. And I have a detail for you. What you see here are the indications of what veins to take blood from. So there are arrows pointing to the various bloodletting sites, and then the description around that figure describes when to take blood. And this is sort of an important thing because I think we moderns, when we think about a doctor taking blood in the Middle Ages, we just assume they found a convenient vein and they took a bunch of blood and that was it. But in fact, there was a science to it. An incorrect one, of course, but nevertheless, there was a science. And so depending on what the condition was, depending on the diagnosis, that would determine what blood, what vein they would try to tap, as well as how much. Also, they would consult astrological considerations when to take blood, under what astrological sign. This would depend on the patient's sign, on the signs in the zodiac and the planetary positions when the disease occurred or crested. It was not an uncomplicated thing. And so you had to have these diagrams so that you could help physicians know when and where to take blood from. Here's another example of homo venarium. This is from not a book for physicians, but a book for barber surgeons. This is from the Guild Book of the Barber Surgeons, also from England. In the Middle Ages in England, but also in other European countries, a distinction was made between doctors and surgeons, a distinction we kind of make today. But in the Middle Ages, that meant something different. Physicians went to university. They were medicos. They studied, they were able to read Latin, in some cases Greek. They, as I said, trained in a medical university. And in some places, they actually did not engage in bloodletting. That was left to the barber surgeons, who literally would let blood, lance boils, excuse me, set bones, cut hair, and things like that. These guys were not trained in a university. They were trained in an apprenticeship system by an older, more experienced barber surgeon. They were usually could not read Latin, sometimes could not read the vernacular language as well. They were illiterate. They were a different group of people. But they also, at least in England, belonged to a guild. And this is the bleeding figure from the Guild Book of the Barber Surgeons. And I have a detail for you as well from the left hand of this particular homo venarium. And there in Middle English at the bottom, it says, ye can take the left hand, and for these purposes, you can successfully take blood from it, and it would be a good thing. Along with bloodletting and blood, it was important for a medieval physician to examine a patient's urine. Now, urine itself is not a humor, but it is a liquid that's pretty easy to get. And what you find in these medieval books of medicine, and occasionally medieval books of astrological medicine, you find a so-called urine wheel. And here's an example from a work I've already shown you, that a Welsh work, a treatise on urine by Gutun Owain. And what you see in these, they're usually wheels, circular, and there's a ring of flasks, which were known as motula, and they contain samples of different kinds of urine. And what a medieval doctor would look at would be the color, of course. They would check viscosity by swirling it around. They would look for what they would call casts, tests by which they mean particulates. So if someone had kidney or bladder stones and they were small, condition we call microlithiasis, you might see some of these in the urine. There should not be any particulates in the urine, of course. They would also smell the urine and they would also taste the urine. That disgusts my audiences often when I say that, but in fact, urine is, for all practical purposes, sterile. Now, having said that, I'm not suggesting you go home and taste anybody's urine, even your own. There are things you can catch from that, so please don't do that. However, in general, it's safe to do, and of course, among the conditions you can diagnose by tasting urine is diabetes, because in an untreated diabetic, type 1 diabetic, there'll be a buildup of sugar in the blood. The kidneys are not able to return the sugar to the blood, which is one of the kidney functions. It ends up in the urine. It's not supposed to be there. It ends up, you taste it, it's sweet, and you have a diagnosis. So it was routinely done. Now, along with the Zodiacal Man, there is a lesser known and less frequently seen figure called the Planetary Man. And this is an example from the late 15th century. It's from another book of Hours, the Hours of Louis Carré, a manuscript. It's in the Bodleian, and interestingly, we do not know who painted the illustrations, but we know that it was a specific artist. We know from stylistic examinations that there was a specific artist who did a series of illustrations, and we call this guy the master of the prayer book of Maximilian. And art historians refer to these cool names, master of the such and such, they're called Notname, which in German literally means emergency names or helpful names, because we don't know his actual name. Now, a planetary man is different. He does not have the signs of the zodiac imposed on his body. In this example, there are zodiacal considerations written in those scrolls, those phylacteries, those white things that surround him. Here is a detail. But what I wanted to share with you here was this feature. In the four corners of this image are four people, images of four people, and they represent those four temperaments associated with the four humors. So there on the upper left, the choleric, that's too much yellow bile, and these people are cranky. So if you're cranky, that could be your problem. And by the way, yellow bile, which is a real thing, can be found in the gallbladder, and even in the Middle Ages was occasionally removed. You could put in a trocar, a tube, with a pointy end, metal tube, poke it in there and get some yellow bile out to balance that humor. But it wasn't done as routinely as bloodletting because you're invading somebody's abdominal space and it's not so safe. On the upper right, the sanguinic, that's too much blood. Then on the bottom left, phlegmatic, this is too much phlegm. And then the melancholic on the lower right, too much black bile, which of course doesn't exist. And melancholia is they were depressives. They had depression, we would now say, of course. The phlegmatics were also thought to be to have too much cold and wet, and the cholerics too much hot and dry. And the way you would treat these people would be to treat them typically allopathically. And what that means is you would treat them with a drug preparation, usually herbal, but occasionally made from minerals and precious metals, that had the properties that were opposite to what they had too much of. So if you were phlegmatic and you were too cold and wet, they would treat you with a preparation that came from ingredients that had the characteristics hot and dry. Now, there were associations between the planets, the known planets, and the parts of the body and diseases as well. Again, I won't read them all, but I have them here for you. Mercury, associated with the brain, the nervous system, and then with nervous diseases, things like tremor, neuroses, and also insanity. The sun, the heart and spine disorders, Mars, arteries, muscle, teeth, and so on. Jump down to Venus, digestive and reproductive systems, urinary and digestive disorders. And then the moon, ovaries, menstrual, and mammary disorders and edema. I should actually comment on Saturn and Jupiter really quickly. Saturn, you'll see, is also associated with what in the Middle Ages they would have called decline, diseases of decline or wasting diseases. So diseases in which your patient lost weight, became what we would now call cachectic, looking like a skeleton, couldn't eat or couldn't keep food down. And then the moon, Jupiter, associated with the opposite, disorders of excess, but also with the liver and liver disorders. And in fact, one actual disorder of the liver that is arguably is a disorder of excess is alcoholic cirrhosis of the liver, in which excessive alcohol consumption results in the destruction of liver tissue and ultimately liver failure. There are also conditions, dietary activities, which can lead to a fatty liver, usually not exclusively dietary, but that's also a so-called, what would have been called a disease that was a disorder of excess. Among the things you find in these astrological medical works, though, were ways for the astrologer physician to figure out what the positions of the planets and the stars and the constellations were. So we see some of these really extraordinary little diagrams in these astrological medical texts. They're called volvils, and they sort of replace an actual honest-to-goodness astronomical astrological instrument, like an armillary sphere, which the Ptolemy was holding in that picture I showed you, or a quadrant or an astrolabe. This was a paper one, and you could move it. It has little dials, little arrows, and it swivels. You can move it around, and depending on the time of year, the time of month, the time of day, you could use it to help you determine what the planetary and zodiacal settings were that you would use in your diagnosis, your therapy treatment, and your prognosis. Among the things you had to take into account was not only what drugs, for example, you were going to use for the patient, but when those drugs, if they were herbal, if they were plants, when were they harvested? In many instances, they would only be effective, or it was thought that they would only be effective when they were harvested under the right conjunction of the planets and the stars. So again, quite a complex system, one that we now believe is completely wrong, of course, but nevertheless, there was a system to it, and it was followed by the doctors of that time. My primary appointment at Texas A&M for many years was not in the medical school, it was in the College of Veterinary Medicine, even though I'm not a veterinarian. And I've taught physiology to veterinary students for many years, as well as physiology to other students. So I wanted to show you the zodiacal horse. There are pictures of it in books of horse medicine, of equine medicine. Before the modern period, veterinary medicine was equine medicine, because if someone had a cow or a pig and they weren't well, you killed them and ate them, or a chicken. If you had a cat, and cats killed mice, and you just let them be, and if they got sick or got run over by a cart, that was too bad. And even dogs were not really companion animals in the modern sense, and for the most part also were not treated. Perhaps if you were the hunting dog of a noble person who was wealthy, his personal physician would attend to you. But there was no small animal medicine. Even in the 18th century, in the late 18th century, when the first modern veterinary school was founded in France in 1761 in Lyon, it was founded by an equine specialist, and all of the medicine taught was equine medicine. It wasn't until quite modern times that small animal medicine became a thing. So animals also were, in the medieval concept, in the medieval world, thought to be affected by the cosmos, the macrocosm and the microcosm. And here we have the zodiacal horse. You've got a sun and a moon at its feet. You have the planets in that ring surrounding it, some of them labeled that you can see Jupiter there, for example. And then on the body of the horse, the respective zodiacal signs corresponding to its anatomy. And this, of course, would be used for diagnostic and therapeutic purposes as well. I want to turn to another way in which this information, astrological and medical, was disseminated. And that is through what we call, and what were called then, almanacs. And this is a printed one. This is from 1494. So it's an early printed work. It was printed during the first 50 years of after the invention of movable type. We call works printed between 1450 and 1500 incunabula. And they're a particular interest of mine, particularly German language ones. And this is an almanac from 1494. So it's the Almanach auf das Jahr 1494. It was printed by a guy named Caspar Hochfeder in Nuremberg. And I'll show you some details in just a moment. It's a single sheet. An Einzelblatt, the Germans would say, a broadsheet, printed on fairly cheap paper in two colors, which is kind of nice. That was a little bit fancy, but it was sort of cheaply made. And they printed, we believe, relatively a lot of these things, but very few of them have survived into the modern period for a few reasons. One of those reasons is they were printed on cheap paper and they disintegrated, and they were also carried around and folded and used by physicians who needed astrological information. The other reason is they were specific for the year, and they were specific for the place. So this one was only good until December 31st, 1494, and was only good in and around the southern German city of Nuremberg. And so we're fortunate to have a few of these in libraries around the world. This one's in the Bodleian, and I actually had a chance to look at the original this summer when I was there doing some research on these guys. And it was a very, very cool experience for me, kind of like being in the Leonard Nimoy Theater. It's a cool experience, and I enjoyed it very much. Let me show you some of the things that you find in these almanacs. First, there's always information on when the new moon and the full moon will be for each of the months. So what you're seeing here on the extreme left are the months. And the names of the months are a little bit weird looking even to a German speaker because in 1494, they didn't speak modern German. They spoke Frühneuhochdeutsch, which is early New High German. So it's kind of like modern German, but not exactly like modern German, a bit like Middle English. A little more modern than that, but a bit like Middle English. This particular list is starting with February, actually, and at the very bottom is Jena, January of that year. And then the next arrow is pointing to the day, so that top one there is saying Dienstag, Tuesday, and it's saying Tuesday after the first of the month. That will be a new moon. Then next to that, in that little rectangle there, it says Stunden and minutes, so hours and minutes. What time of day the new moon would be, well, a new moon. And then the next column is for the full moon and the same information, what day to expect it for each of the months, and also at what time of the day you're going to see it. There was also information on when to take blood. And that's this word here, that is Aderlassens. Aderlass is the German for bloodletting, and this is a bloodletting summary, starting with Jena, starting with January, and going all the way to the bottom right, Christmon, which is December, the month of the birth of Christ. And what you see here, again, is some cool. I chose Wintermond, winter month, because it's the month I was born. I'm a Scorpio. I was born on. I don't actually follow astrological stuff. I just study it and talk about it. But I am a Scorpio technically. And so there is November Wintermond, and on the right hand side you see some words. The top one is Zeichen, and that word means sign. And below that are three of the zodiac signs: Aries, Cancer, and Scorpio. Widder is Aries in early New High German. Krebs is Cancer, Krebs the crab, and Scorpio is Scorpio. And what the black line under Wintermond is saying is that this is when it's okay to take blood. For someone born under the sign of Aries, it's okay to take blood in that month, but also from specific parts of the body. That's the extreme, that's the middle blue column. So if you are an Aries, blood can be taken in November, but it has to be taken from your head, from a vein in your head. If you are Cancer, then it can be taken from the Brust, which is Brust or breast, chest in German. And then finally for Scorpios, and this is maybe no surprise because the Scorpio sign is always associated with the genitals, then blood can be taken from the genitalia, which they did do, from scrotal veins, penile veins, and in the case of women as well from the labia. So they did do that if they thought that is what the patient needed. And then another thing that we see in these almanacs is information on the eclipses, which of course were important in the ancient and in the medieval world, and it was important to be able to predict them. And that is the word there, finsternis with a V, but it's pronounced like an F, finsternis, which is darkness. So this is also, we're going to have this year 3 eclipses, but there's also a medical element on this page as well, or this part of the almanac, and that's in this little rectangle, and I've blown it way up for you. This is telling us, also note, it says, also note that for Cancer, it's good to give them their medicine in the form of an electuary, electuarian. Electuaries are medicines that are made with honey. So you take your active ingredients, whatever they might be, herbs, ground up minerals, mix them with honey, you give it to someone. Sounds pretty good. For Vaga, for the Sagittarius, medicine, Arznei, is good, allerlei. You can give it to them in any form, it'll work. Scorpio, then you have to give them their medicine as a drink, Getränk. You have to give it as a liquid medicine for it to be effective. Aquarius, also, doesn't matter. You can give it any way you like. And then finally, for a Fischchen, which is Pisces, the fish, Arznei, gut in Pillen. So you have to give the medicine for it to be effective in the form of a pill. So as I say, the science was complicated, albeit, well, by modern standards and modern thinking, not too accurate. The pervasiveness of both astrology and medicine outside of medical works is also something that I'm interested in, something I wanted to share with you. It became almost meme-like, you could say, in the Middle Ages. And an example of that is a very famous work that is located in the Huntington Library, not far from where we are in San Marino. It's the so-called Ellesmere Chaucer. It's a early 15th century copy, manuscript copy of Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. And one of the pilgrims going to Canterbury with Chaucer's group of pilgrims was a doctor, the physician, and there was a physician's tale. And this is an image of the physician on horseback. And even if you can't read Middle English, if you open to this page, You know it's the physician because what is he holding in his hand? He's holding a matula, he's holding a urine flask, and he's looking at the urine. Chaucer wrote this about the physician. With us there was a doctor of physic, and all this world they was the nun him leak, to spake of physic and of surgeria, for he was grounded in astronomia. Physic is not physics, it is medicine, but as you see, he was grounded in astronomy. And medical mathematics, which is what the ancients called it as well, was a course taught in medical schools in Europe in the Middle Ages, and it wasn't epidemiology, it was, in fact, astrology. Among the ways doctors would have access to this information, there were those almanacs that I showed you, but there was something even cooler. There were folded almanacs. And what you're looking at here are the outer covers of two of them. They are from, the 15th century, both in the British Library. These were small, quite small, so maybe about so big, and they had little attachments on the end of these covers, which we believe were for a cord. They were meant, we think, to be carried from the belt, the girdle of the physician, and they would hang upside down. So you would flip them up to open them and look at them. So some scholars refer to them as bat books because they hang upside down like a bat, which I thought was also kind of cool. But they are folding almanacs. We have about 30 that have been found. And interestingly, they are all from England. We have not found them from other places. Some are in Latin. They're not all necessarily in Middle English, but they're all from Latin, and they're extremely cool. This is a picture of one opened from somewhere between 1415 and 1420. It's open to the page showing you the Zodiacal Man and also some table of calculations and information. Interestingly, this one was one of the very few that's not in a museum. It was sold in 2013 at an auction by Christie's. And here we have a video. And for this, I think I'll need to use the mouse. Oh, there we go. It's working. Here the conservator is opening up one of these. You see how tiny it is. This is the first page. Table, text, good stuff. And here we skipped ahead. They're going to open it up to the page of the Zodiacal Man. So it's folded in threes, and then again, often the sheets are oblong, typically 6 to 8 sheets in one of these, and then that's the back page. This particular one here was a very, very fancy one, and is thought maybe to not have been actually in use, because in use they would get beat up, get blood on them, and humors and stuff. It's a very, very fancy one, and it's thought maybe this was made either for a wealthy physician or for a nobleman, probably with a lot of money, who was interested in astrological medicine and wanted one of these cool bat books just to sort of show off to his friends that I got this cool bat book. As I was saying, there is kind of a pervasiveness of this astrological conception and importance that transcends medicine. But I also now, in the last part of this talk, last few slides, I want to talk about the transition from the Middle Ages to early modern period and to the scientific revolution, to the time when there was a transfer in our understanding, excuse me, of what was going on in the cosmos and the nature of the planets and the stars. My images are actually not showing on the big screen at the moment. There we go. Thank you very much. So here we have what I think is an absolutely stunning painting by Diego Velázquez from the early 17th century. It is a meme. It's showing the Immaculate Conception, the Virgin of the Immaculate Conception. Many people painted this. The Virgin Mary with a ring of stars, 12 of them around her head. She's standing on a moon. And the moon in these images, not just Velázquez's, but many of them, is also immaculate. It is a shining, perfectly smooth, undifferentiated sphere. But at around the same time, another artist, oh, and there's a detail, so you can see it in a little more. She's standing on a perfectly smooth moon surface. But at around the same time, Lodovico Cigoli, the Italian artist, also did, in this case, a fresco of the Virgin of the Immaculate Conception, but she is standing on a very different moon. She's standing on a moon that looks like the moon. It has craters and so on. And the reason for this, I thought, again, was quite fascinating, and I wanted to share it with you. Cigoli was a classmate and a friend of Galileo, and apparently knew about Galileo's work. We don't know if he had a chance to look through Galileo's telescope, but he understood what Galileo had seen through his telescope, and he reproduced it in this image of the Virgin of the Immaculate Conception. So even in a work that is not medical or even astrological, we're seeing this transition from the sort of ancient and medieval understanding of the cosmos and what it was like and how it worked into something more like the modern one. However, the Zodiacal Man lives on in some cases to this day, but here is a relatively recent example I thought you'd enjoy. It's from 1758, and it's from Poor Richard's Almanac, the Poor Richard's Almanac printed by our own Benjamin Franklin. It's not a particularly attractive Zodiacal Man, but there it is. But what if there's something actually to this? What if, in fact, Ptolemy and the ancient Babylonians and all those medieval doctors were actually onto something? If you go to the medical literature, which I do routinely for these talks, and check it out, and look for influences of the stars and the moon on medical phenomena, there's quite a literature on that. And here is a paper in a peer-reviewed journal, Neurology, in 2006, by Polychronopoulos and colleagues, looking at lunar phase and the occurrence of seizures. And the title was Just an Ancient Legend? Question mark? Well, I don't know, maybe not. They actually found that there was a statistically significant increase, a big statistically significant increase in seizure onset on full moon compared to all other moon phases. And those p-values on the right in that red ellipse are significant. Now, remember, statistical significance is correlation, not causation, but nevertheless, this is sort of supportive of everything the medieval doctors would have told us if there was one standing here before you today. But, maybe not. Most of the studies that I've looked at, and most of the studies I think that there are, suggest that there is no correlation. This is a paper by Louise Sagan and colleagues, Internal Medicine Journal from 2020, so fairly recent, also peer-reviewed journal, Impact of Lunar Phase on Outcome Following ST Elevation Myocardial Infarction. ST elevation is a segment is a part of the electrocardiogram and is supposed to be flat and at baseline. If it's elevated, it indicates a certain kind of heart attack. And what they found was there was no correlation. On the left is a table showing the incidence between different moon phases. The p-value is above 0.05, so we statistically say it is not statistically significant. And then on the right, so-called Kaplan-Meier survival estimates. This looks at how well you survived your myocardial infarction, if it occurred on a full moon, if it occurred on a waning moon, and so on. And the two lines are the same. They are overlapping. So yeah, and the answer in this case is no. And then the last example from modern data is this one, also peer-reviewed journal, BMC Neurology. This is lunar phase and intracranial aneurysm rupture, myth or reality. An aneurysm is a burst blood vessel. If you have one in your head, in the cerebral blood vessel, you're suffering from a hemorrhagic stroke. Depending on where it is in your brain and how serious, you can be paralyzed, you can be killed. It's very serious business. They found in their own research there was no correlation with moon phase. In one of the papers they cite, that second one, Ali et al., there seemed to be a correlation, but it's a fairly small sample size. In the bulk of the studies they looked at, in virtually all, there was no correlation. So I think we can conclude, at least at this point, based on these modern studies, that as Cassius says to Brutus in William Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, Act 1, Scene 2, the fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves. I want to thank you very much for your attention. It's been a real pleasure presenting this, and I'm happy to answer questions if there are any, and then because of where we are, live long and prosper. Okay. I think you need the microphone. Is someone going to... Thank you. Or you can yell.
Well, there were.
I can hear you.
There were medicine men.
You're on the Zoom. Do that.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I can hear you, but the Zoomies can't. Thank you so much. The Zoomies. Yes, thank you, Zoom World. Appreciate your beaming in.
They were medicine men who were fairly skilled in herbal medicine, and witches and wizards and people like that coeval with most of these physicians. And do you have anything you can say about who was more effective, the astrologers or the dopers?
Excuse me. It's a great question, and let me answer it slightly more generally. If we compare, say, the medicos, the university-trained physicians, and everybody else who practiced medicine who was a healer in the medieval world, it was probably a toss-up. Because again, if you're a humoral physician, a Galenic physician, you're so wrong about what's going on in the human body that you're going to make a lot of mistakes. And the knowledge, the wisdom of folk medicine was really quite profound. Now, there were mistakes there too, and I'll give you a specific example. Among the things that was believed by both folk healers in the Middle Ages and trained physicians was something called the doctrine of signatures. And what that meant was they believed that the appearance of something, like a plant or the flower of a plant, indicated what it could be used for. So some orchids look like genitalia, they were good for venereal disease. This, of course, is not true, but nevertheless, some of the stuff that they did use, the folk healers, worked, and they knew it worked, and they passed this down generationally, and so on. So you weren't necessarily worse off going to a folk healer. They would also do astrological things, although they were not skilled in it. They had not studied the way that one would if you took a course in medical mathematics. But of course, probably that wasn't actually helping. Surgery is a little bit different. Again, medicos in the Middle Ages usually did not do surgery. That was considered beneath them. That was manual labor, and that was done by the barber surgeons. There you would have to be lucky and get one who was well apprenticed and well trained, and then you just have to be really incredibly lucky anyway. But they did some exotic surgeries. They did amputations, they cut for stone, they removed bladder stones. All of this, of course, without anesthesia or aseptic technique. I gave a lecture about this once. But actually, one of the things I said in another series of lectures I gave about women healers in ancient and medieval medicine, I think it's safe to say that the vast majority of human patients over the course of human history were treated by women. But women, almost without exception, were not allowed
I'm going to open up
into
questions on
European
Zoom as soon as he's
universities,
done with his.
not allowed into medical schools, with a couple of exceptions in Salerno in the 13th century, but very, very few. So the answer to your question, it was a long answer, but the answer is probably didn't matter that much. You were probably just as good going to a local healer, maybe better. And it was cheaper, which is important, even today. Other questions?
We have another one here from Tony Cook.
I am curious how much the practitioners actually believed the astrology, in the sense that, like, today, you know, we have psychology of various types, which has been practiced scientifically for over a century. Yet we know some of the early scientific thoughts about psychology are nonsense now. Yet people were maybe successfully treated sometimes. So I was thinking, like, Galen would have been like Dr. House, and, you know, he has all this knowledge and stuff, but he's still using his own judgment to come to a correct thing. In other words, the astrology to me seems kind of like a checklist of things to do, but did the doctor still make their own informed, intuitive, maybe decision?
Well, I see there's a two-part question. I mean, first, I thought I heard you say, did the doctors believe, say, in the astrological stuff, or was it just sort of part of the paraphernalia of doing medicine in that civilization and at that time? I mean, we don't know, but generally, the consensus, I think, among scholars is, yeah, they thought this was important and they believed it. So I think I want to say that the use of astrology was, I think, important to them, maybe at least in part because they were so ineffective. You know, this kind of medicine often didn't work super well. And one of the curious ways this gets expressed is if you look at the works of a non-medicus healer, a non-university healer, Hildegard von Bingen, who I like very much, you know, I studied quite a bit. In her book Physica, which is one of her two medical books, she writes things like, if you take this herb and pound it under the appropriate zodiacal situations and planetary situations and mix it with wine and give it to a patient with the following conditions to drink, they will be cured, unless God wants them to die. So which is kind of what modern doctors do in a sense too. They say, well, this is the therapy, and we know from our studies and from clinical trials that it works in X number of patients, but you could still die, and it wouldn't be my fault. And Hildegard was saying the same thing. So there was that. I think patients in these times had lower expectations than we do, and reasonably so, because the odds of them surviving anything serious were probably fairly low. It's amazing to me, as someone trained in Western medical thinking, and as a patient myself, in modern Western medicine that anyone survived in the Middle Ages. I don't know if they were tougher than us or whatever, but yeah, that's. But I do think they believed it, and that it was important, and they would invest in things like those bat books so that they could be on top of the astrological components of their medical practice. I believe. Yeah.
I have a question from Zoom. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so did transient events like lunar or solar eclipses, did that play a part in any of this, or was it mostly just sort of astrological, where the planets were, where the more predictable things? Although eclipses are predictable as well.
Yeah, to the best of my knowledge, the more predictable things or the more sort of planetary positions, zodiacal position things was more important. Eclipses are rare-ish, but as you saw in that almanac, they were laid out. If they could predict them, if they thought they could predict them, they would try to do so. They were important events in the lives of those people, important in sort of almost apocalyptic terms sometimes, in the lives of those people. I have not actually read in the research I've done thus far of specific medical modifications, let's call them, to accommodate eclipses. And that may just be because they were rare enough that they weren't that important in the day-to-day lives and day-to-day practice of the physicians and patients of those times. It's a great question, though. I would have to look into that some more. There's one right there.
It seems surprising that astrology there was an allowance for this. And I'm just curious, was there any persecution from the church authority? Because, astrology was antithetical to biblical texts.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, was it just they turned a blind eye, or was there a debate? It's curious.
Yeah, I mean, one did have to tread carefully in the European Middle Ages in terms of what the church said was okay. But the church throughout this period changed what it said was okay a lot. And to the best of my knowledge from the work I've done on this topic, the church regarded at least the more astronomical part of this as to be important to determine when the feast days were going to be, of which there were zillions, like every day practically was some saint's day, and you had to know when they were going to be. And so it seems that this wasn't really much of a problem. And in fact, many of the physicians, certainly in, let's say, the middle to high Middle Ages, so from the 9th century through the 10th or 11th century, many, if not the majority of physicians were in fact clergy. And if they were not out and out monks, and they were, again, mostly men, if they were not out and out monks, they would belong to minor orders. So medical students in universities in the Middle Ages would join minor orders. So they were not celibate, they were not taken monks' vows, they were still members of the clergy, technically speaking. So it seemed to me, again, from the work I did putting this talk together and my other work, that the church was not going out of its way to persecute these people. Popes had their own body doctors, live medicus, and this was thought to be, I should say, a potent tool of the medical profession. And the Pope and the cardinals, and especially wealthy and powerful clergy, were not going to deny themselves the chance to not die, as they saw it. But yeah, the people who got persecuted more were the non-university trained folk medical people, particularly women. And this is one of the sort of tragic aspects and tragic stories. If you were a wise woman, a healer, you had to be careful. And also midwives. I gave a lecture a couple of years ago that focused on midwives and the history of midwifery, which again was mostly practiced by women till the 18th century, when doctors began to sort of take over and take the business out of their hands. And it was difficult because if you lost a baby, you could be accused of having killed that baby or done something or supported an abortion. Which the church did frown on and still does. But in terms of astrology, they seem to be okay. Great question.
Yep. So I saw, Greg, you had a question on Zoom. You want to speak it out? Maybe not.
Is there a Zoom question?
There was. I saw it come up.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
There you go, Greg.
I had to get off mute. I actually have some historical study background, and I'm interested in some of this astronomy stuff. So these 13th through 16th century texts that are for physicians, have all this information about where planets will be, but where did they actually get that information? Who were the actual astronomers doing the calculations on where these planets would be in the upcoming year or two, or however long they predicted it? Or were there mathematicians? How did the physicians or the books that they used, where did the actual astronomical information come from, and where in medieval society do those people fit in?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I don't actually pretend to be an expert on medieval astronomy per se. There were professional astronomers. There were people who were not physicians, whose job and whose practice was in the use of the instrumentation they have, the pre-telescopic instrumentation they had, like armillary spheres and astrolabes and so on. And I think and they wrote books and works and manuscripts. And I think some of the information that ended up in the astrological medical text came from there. The physicians, as I said, were trained in medical mathematics. But they were not necessarily the world's best astronomers, astrologers. As a sort of sidebar on that, and this would make an interesting other lecture, so it's something I think I'm going to work on. There are a fair number of even fairly famous astronomers who were also physicians. Copernicus, Tycho Brahe, they went to medical school as well as becoming astronomers. So there was overlap, and that overlap actually is also something that I think is a characteristic of the Middle Ages and even the early modern period. There were these folks, lots of them, who were polymaths, who, when you look at their resumes, they were physicians, they were jurists, they were lawyers, they were historians, they were philologists, they were scholars of language. They were 5 or 6 or 7 things, like they had 6 or 7 PhD equivalents, and that was a commoner thing. They were mathematicians. But yeah, there were professionals, though, who were better at math than your average doctor, and who focused more on predicting these things than your average physician would do.
All right, any other questions?
Great
in
questions.
Zoom land.
Here.
Oh, there.
Yeah.
The one thing that puzzled me about this was that you had a lot of Roman and Greek physicians or speculators or whatever. Was there any reasonably good medicine amongst the Hebrews?
The answer is yes, there was. I do not know how into astrological medicine, say, Jewish physicians, both in antiquity or the Middle Ages, were. In the Middle Ages, I suspect that they were participants in that. And there were some very, very important Jewish physicians, including in Catholic countries that were busy persecuting Jews. Sometimes the kings and queens would want to have a particularly famous and astute physician, and sometimes they turned out to be Jewish ones. So I'm not I don't pretend to be in a good position to be able to answer that question. But there was lots of Jewish medicine going on, and I do not know exactly how much astrology they got into. There are elements of Kabbalistic medicine, though. But again, that's not something I've looked into well enough yet to feel confident commenting on. But it's a great question.
Unless there's any other questions. Oh, we have some more. Okay.
Yeah,
we are going to have to.
You've got things to do.
Evening a little bit, but pick up these couple.
You've got society business to attend to.
So how did they determine which planet or constellation was associated with what body part? Like, why is Jupiter associated with the liver rather than the moon?
Yeah, they stole this concept, and they stole the associations from really the Egyptians and from Ptolemy. Now, so Ptolemy basically got them from the ancient Egyptians, who in turn probably got them from the Babylonians. Why the Babylonians decided that Aries was the head, Pisces the feet, that's a little harder to know. To the best of my knowledge, there isn't specific textual information on that, although I could be wrong. So yeah, I think that's where the people in the Middle Ages got it. They got it from their forebears. And maybe a sort of related point is that one of the things that's important to understand about scholarship in the Middle Ages, whether it's medical or anything else, is that authority was extremely important. Authority was more important than observation. So for example, Galen, the physician in Rome, he dissected animals and then wrote about human anatomy based on what he saw. And you see the mistakes he made. For example, he thought that the liver was lobed, that the liver had lobes in the end that sort of grasped the stomach. And that's true in apes, but not in humans. But you see this mistake 1,000 years later in textbooks and books written by people who did human dissection. So they had the actual evidence in front of them, and they still drew their picture to look like Galen. And that would be true in the case of these astrological associations as well. What the ancients said was law. And it was difficult, I think, for the medieval mind to say, okay, I'm going to violate this. I would say that I don't. I'm not absolutely sure about anyone, but yeah, I think that is a more recondite question that we don't necessarily have a direct answer to. Yeah.
At the same time, you seem to be saying that there was a lot of practical medicine going on all along, as well as the zodiacal approach. I was wondering, just within terms of the actual text, do you see lots of practical approaches in the texts, or is it pretty dominated by the zodiacal approach?
Now, you see a lot of practical information. It depends on the text. So, for example, that Welsh one that I showed you, which is kind of a compendium of lots of things, including non-medical things, well, those urine wheels don't have a direct astrological medical element. They're simply urine wheels. So that's bona fide, good, evidence-based, to some extent, medicine that was practiced in the ancient world in the Middle Ages. And probably the bulk of what you'd see in these books would be more like that. Yeah, practical, but not always well-based. But yes, practical. What to do, how to do it. Yeah. And then the zodiacal stuff would tell you when to do it. Yeah. Also a problem.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Wasser.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It was a pleasure. Let me detach myself.
Be free. There you go. Yep. It's kind of funny though. I mean, like, there's not really a scientific direct correlation between astronomy and medicine anymore, but I will be willing to bet you that every one of you sitting here are here because of your own well-being one way or another. And I will know that those of you who do this for a living aren't doing it for the money. So I'll bet you that's a fair assumption. All right, that was fantastic. Actually, really fantastic. Okay, so we have some notes to bring to you from the club leadership. Firstly, we are looking for a member at large to function as the election coordinator for the coming board of directors in next year. So if any of you really likes tallying votes and doing that sort of a thing, or just general librarian work, that can be something for you. Reach out to me or on a groups IO, or where should we do this? Spencer, we're trying to free you up, so we're going to give you more work so you can be freed up. You got to earn it. You got to pay it forward. So that's the thing. You've been doing us all a great service. We decided we do not want to make this a board member just for I don't know, clarity, just well-meaningness. The next thing that's worth noting is that we are beginning the telescope making program again at Garvey. There's been a little note about it on the groups IO, but Terry Colkin, who is in attendance, waving at me. You can't see it. He's there. He looks great. Yeah. If you're interested in doing it, we're going to structure it a little differently. And Tony Cook will be there too. That's right. It's going to be a fearsome twosome. Details are going to roll out as we know how many people want to do it and when schedule wise. I think we're going to start doing it on Saturdays. Tim, is that right? Yeah. Well, we can do it there. We can't do it on Saturday. So we're going to be doing it at Garvey on Saturdays during the day rather than just pecking away at it on Wednesday nights, which is much better. So if you're interested, maybe put it in Zoom, put it in the chat. If you're on Groups IO, put it in Groups IO. If you're here, come talk to me or somebody, or to me. I'll take it and then I'll pass it on. I'm here in the camera with the microphone. I'll take it. Yeah, I know. It's all right. It's all right. So far. Okay, beyond that, other news at Lockwood. We are, let's see, I'm going to try to feather our lecture into this a little bit. Some of our, let's see, I have a more sanguine outlook to to our eastern and western skies due to tree trimming that we're going to be doing at Lockwood. We're going to be trimming our western trees, and we're going to be removing some to the north to free up our horizons a little bit. That's going to be pretty great. That is money from that is coming from a gracious donor, and we are gracious to that person as well. Other things to note is that it's been kind of passed around, but we do have a new outreach coordinator in Dave Yackerson. Just so you know, don't reach out to Evan anymore. So that is awesome. He's raring to go. Very exciting. It will be. Oh, it will be. Yeah, we're in our transition committees are still getting the email addresses pushed onto the new people. Okay, so with that, I'm going to bring on a quick blurb, something I decided I wanted to do when I took on this role, and I wanted to during the banquet, we always talk, we're really good about highlighting certain members for what they've done at the end of the year, but I think it's also good to bring on mention members that are doing stuff good throughout the year, and also just to introduce you to each other. So you're not like, oh, who the heck is that guy at the end of the year, like amongst them. So I'm calling this section Good Heavens is what I'm calling it. So this month's Good Heavens is to Roman Tolesnikov. He is a new board member. He was initially famous for working on the James Webb Telescope. He is working on revitalizing the 26-inch telescope with a new spider and a new secondary. And he is practically solitarily building the Takahashi rig, which will soon be available to all of you. And then you will all owe him a great deal of thanks. So I'm just getting ahead of you. Thank you, Roman. Amazing. Oh, also worth noting, he and I started the same exact time. We were the same month. Yeah, May 5th, 2022. So that's all. Did I miss anything? Yeah. Good. Yes, register for the drawing because we're about to draw. Okay, I'm handing it over to our new outreach coordinator, Dave Yackerson.
Thank you very much. Let's hear it for our new president, Keith. All right, great job. First time. Okay. All right, let's go for the drawing. We have 3 giveaways for here and 3 giveaways on Zoom this evening. What's that? Get in the camera? Okay. Can you see me now? Okay. Just so you know, for those of you that don't know about the telescopes, the telescope in Lockwood, that one is going to be remote control. So you'll be able to handle that at your house with your computer. That's going to be really cool. Yeah, and if and if you want to know about ancient stuff like they were talking about today, just ask Tim. All right, he was there. All righty. Okay, here we go. Get your tickets out. Please give Nady a big hand for passing out the tickets this evening. Yay! And she did she did go ahead and move this all around. She shook it up to make sure it was going to be proper tonight, right? Okay. First number is, what are we giving away? All right, well, let's do the number first. 833-5147. 5147 up here. Okay, what did they get? Spencer? Oh, you're taking care of it? Okay, what? A laser, a green laser. We got tons of those. You're going to have fun. Just don't point them in your face or anybody else. Congratulations. And Nady has it up there for you. Okay. Next one here. We'll do them here first, then go online and give them away. Okay. Yeah, go ahead. We can do it after. I'll get the ticket first. Next number is 833-5137. 5137, right up there. Oh, who is it? Andrew, you got it? Andrew, okay. What does he get? An online purchase from our store. Is that correct? All right, excellent. And the last number here is 8335. Last number is 123. Nady, you won? Cheat. It's rigged. Yeah. All righty. That's all right. Go ahead with the online. Okay, let me give you the mic. Let you do that. Okay, first winner online is Ron Pepitone. And what does he get? Ron Pepitone, you there? All right. Okay, what does he get? Online store gift. Okay, and the next one. Dan Bednarski. Dan Bednarski. Are you there? Okay, what does he get? Online store. You get to get a gift from the online store. And the last one. All right. Greg Thompson. Greg, are you there? All right. What does he get?
I am. What did I get?
Online store. Congratulations,
Oh,
guys.
awesome. Very
Okay,
good.
we
Thank
need
you
to
so
make note
much.
of those three. Okay, I'm sure. Okay. One last thing I'd like to say is real quickly, doing outreaches. The outreaches are starting to come into me, and I'm putting them on the group's IO and also on the night sky calendar. It is important for this group that when you do an outreach, please log yourself into the Night Sky Network and put your name down. This is very important for our group to keep us going for our for what? Yeah, Night Sky Network. It's not just for that, but it proves that we're keeping our nonprofit organization going. What we do is so important. Yeah, for the outreaches. Yes, yes. There will be some daytime. I am telling the people, letting people know that if there is a daytime, first of all, if there is, I will let you know. But people that are contacting me, I'm letting them know also that there is availability that we can do solar during the daytime if the night sky is not there. Okay, so it's so important. Please write your name down. It's real easy to do. Get on the Night Sky Network and put your name where you were, and also you also get credit, tax credit, for doing that. Is that correct? Right? Huh? You get a deduction. Yes, you can use that for a deduction. All right, because we are a nonprofit. How long after the fact can they do that?